So I went back out on a couple more dives. It was 4 dives this particular day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. It was the same divers that we'd had over Christmas. So this was the day after Boxing Day, and the crack was unreal. It was absolutely brilliant. The boat was running perfectly. I checked the cotter pins. In fact, what I had started to do at the end of the evening was I had taken the canopy down, taken the radio out, taken the cotter pins out, taken the brake cables out, the accelerator cables, taking everything off the boat basically except the engines, and I would just lug that down to David's house. And the next morning then, I'd be up early, I would go back down, and I would reinstall everything, test the engines, take the boat for a little drive out, come back in, tie the boat up again, go down to Dave's house and check the radio and make everything was good. So that's what I started to do then at the end of that, and that limited the drama. There was more of a security presence on the dock from Eddie. Eddie kept his word. Still didn't find out who had put holes in the boat or who had slashed the canopy or did the damage on the boat. It was probably highly unlikely that anybody was ever going to find out who it was, and it was highly unlikely that if anybody did find out who it was, anything was going to be done about it. So the inspector, whose name actually turned out to be David, was quite a nice guy. He kept in touch regularly with Dave to just say that there was no progress, but he was still, waiting for people to, mention if something happened. Dave would still take care of the inspector with a little bottle of rum or a free meal for him and his wife up at the restaurant, just to keep in the good graces. So that was all good in that way there. There was a couple of really decent young policemen there. I had been seen doing my katas on the dock and also a bit of judo, and I basically offered the inspector to do some judo with these guys. I showed them a few chokeholds, because they weren't trained. Not to say that I was anything brilliant, but I had a blue belt in judo, going on a brown. No, I think I had my brown belt at the time. Yeah, I had my brown belt at the time, and so I got into doing little classes. Me and Dave got into doing little classes with the local police guys. The police actually bought gis. They bought karate gis, and so we started doing judo with these guys on a Sunday out at the back of Dave's, where there was a whole bunch of sand, and it was really good. So that kept us in the good graces of the police station as well. I had reported to Dave, the inspector, about Gutsy, Patojo, and these other guys giving us shit. The inspector gave me a nod, and I just basically said, to the inspector, I says, Inspector, these guys carry knives, and if they attack me, what am I allowed to do? And he basically said, defend yourself. And I says, well, what kind of defense? And he just says, you're allowed. He said, if you feel that your life is being threatened, he says, you're allowed to defend yourself. He says, just don't kill him. He says, he says, you can defend yourself. He says, you can punch and kick and bite. He says, but, if, don't be killing these guys, because you'll definitely go to jail. He says, you've made me aware of this. He says, your life has been threatened. He said, as far as I'm concerned, he says, these guys are dirt. He says, they're just fucking scum. He says, he says, they've been terrorizing people. He says, on this island for a long time. He said, but we've never been able to, get anything on them. He says, they all stick together. I was like, okay, fine. I said, so I will be allowed to defend myself? He goes, yes. So there was another guy down there called Iguana Jack. And Iguana Jack was an American guy, and Jack was an artist, but he was also a special police constable. So I don't know Jack's background. They called him Iguana Jack because Jack had a pottery shop, and he used to make absolutely lovely vases, and he would make iguanas, and the iguanas would and he would attach these iguanas onto the side of plates, and his little bowls and everything that he made from clay. It was absolutely brilliant, and his shop was called Iguana Jack's. So I would see Gutsy quite often sitting on Jack's little golf cart, and these guys were just like as thick as thieves. Now, I didn't know what their relationship was. Everybody said that Jack was basically fucking a dirty cop. That he took backhanders and he made sure that these guys didn't get prosecuted or anything in any way. And so Gutsy was always hanging around with him, and he was always on his golf car, and he passed me a couple of times, and he shouted Maricon at me. Jack would just basically smile. Jack thought he was a suave, handsome dude with a moustache. He kind of thought he was a Tom Selleck, and he'd be sitting back smoking his cigarette, all cool and shit. And he thought he was a fucking cross between Clint Eastwood and Tom Selleck. And he knew me. He knew me to say hello to, and he was always asking how I was and how Dave was and all this type of stuff was. To me, he was just a slimy bastard. He had the fucking personality of a dead frog, to be honest. But he just thought that he was a ladies' man, and because he was a special cop, he had, fucking special powers and all this type of stuff. So I used to see Gutsy with him a lot. The day that Gutsy shouted at me, he drove past me, shouted something, and Jack just kind of smiled and walked on, and I'll be pulling Jack about that anyway. So I spoke to Jack a day later about it, and Jack, he goes, it's only words. He says, don't get up, you shouldn't get upset by words. And I just stared Jack out, and I says, well, I'll keep that in mind. And yeah, so everything was going smooth. The diving was great. Dave's mood had picked up a little bit again. Dave was glad I was there, because I wasn't going to fucking deal with any bullshit. We had done the right thing. We'd kind of let it go. We spoke to the police about it. Everything has been reported. Everything was documented. The police was on David's side, to be quite honest. They had confirmed that they didn't like these guys, but couldn't really get them on anything. I was told I could defend myself if I thought my life was being threatened, especially with a weapon. So Gary turned up a couple of days later. This was New Year's Eve. We were flat out busy. We had a full 12 set of divers for 5 dives every day for the next week. So it would be 2 dives in the morning, it would be 2 dives in the afternoon, and a night dive. And the weather was absolutely perfect. The weather had got a bit cooler, because obviously it was coming into their winter time. So the heat had dropped down from the high 90s, hundreds, down to about 80, which was really nice, which was cool down in Belize. And I had acclimatized, and I felt the difference in the heat and the cold. And so for me it was perfect. The water was always a good 80 degrees, but obviously as it got colder, it would drop down into the 70s, and you felt a chill as you got in. Usually I would wear just a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, but when it got a bit colder, I started to wear a 3mm skin suit, basically a full suit. And it made a bit of difference. I wore my bandana when I was diving, because the sun would reflect and burn my baldy head. So even with factor 50 on. By that time I had really nice tan. I was nice and brown. It was the first tan I'd ever had in my life, and it was brilliant. I felt healthy. My skin was perfect. My mood was really up. My testosterone levels were as high as fuck. I was like a bulldog chewing a wasp, and I just felt really, really good. I felt free. I felt I could take on the world. I felt I could fucking chew concrete, and life was just great. Saying that, Jenny and my son Connor were always on my mind. That I was in touch with Jenny regularly, and I had saved enough money to bring her down after Christmas in February for Valentine's Day. So that had been the plan. So yes, everything was good. The diving was great. Life was really good. David was in a better mood. Sue was becoming more of a, I don't know what was happening to Sue, to be honest. Her moods were changing. She was upset all the time. She was really angry all the time, and she was just turning into a complete bitch. I didn't realize until a few weeks later that Sue had actually been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and breast cancer, and this was why her moods were changing. And only Dave knew that, and a couple of Sue's close friends. I didn't, Gary didn't, but the change that Sue was going through, she was, taking her anger and bad temper out on most people around her, but we didn't know that she'd been diagnosed with cancer.